From claims of healings and visions to the world's most inexplicable events, whether you're a believer or a skeptic, the truth is always worth the hunt.
EWTN Radio presents The Miracle Hunter with Michael O'Neill.
Welcome to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. I love when we have new Americans coming down the path to sainthood. And we're talking about people advancing from servant of God to venerable to blessed and to saint. And we have somebody from the United States who is on that path to sainthood, and that's Sister Theresia of the Most Holy Trinity. And we'll be so excited to talk about her on today's show. We'll be talking today with Sister Mary Michael, the provincial vicar of the Carmelites of the Divine Heart of Jesus. And she'll be talking to us about this person on the path to sainthood as a venerable, Sister Theresia. I can't wait to hear more about her. And also Joan Watson will be joining us. She's the author of Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity. Catherine of Siena is, of course, one of the great mystics in the history of the Catholic Church, but her contributions go beyond our knowledge of her mysticism. She turns out to be a great coach, as framed by Joan Watson in this new book from Scepter Publishers. We'll be excited to talk to Joan in just a little bit. And for people who are interested in checking out my series, which looks at people on that path to sainthood, you can check out my series, They Might Be Saints. You can go to theymightbesaints.com and watch any of the episodes, or many of the episodes there, or you can tune in to EWTN Television. On Sunday, May 10th at 1:30 p.m., They Might Be Saints, Father Nelson Baker is the episode that will be airing. You can also tune in for my other series on EWTN. You can also go online to explorewiththemiraclehunter.com to watch any of those episodes that have aired. But you can also tune in on Saturday, May 2nd at 5:30 p.m. Central Time for the episode on Tre Fontane. I investigate this miraculous encounter at the site where St. Paul was martyred, the Virgin of Revelation's appearance to Bruno Carnacchiola, a rabid anti-Catholic, changed both the man and the church itself. Check that one out. Explore with the Miracle Hunter, Tre Fontane, on Saturday, May 2nd at 5:30 p.m. And it was so interesting because I gave a talk at some point not too long ago, earlier this past year, and a young girl came up to me and she came up with her father and she said, I visited Tre Fontane because I watched your episode on EWTN. She was so captivated by that story that on their family vacation to Italy, they made a side trip to that shrine of Tre Fontane. That really touched my heart to hear about that. So check this one out, Tre Fontane, and explore with the Miracle Hunter. And check out my series, They Might Be Saints, or the Might Be Saint of the Day, which relates to They Might Be Saints, is Blessed Alessandra Sabatini, who lived from 1961 to 1984 in Italy. And the 365 Days with Mary project looks at Our Lady of Atocha in Spain in the year 1808. And the question of the week, this is kind of an easy softball question, and I like those sometimes. What has been your favorite country to visit during your travels for filming Explore? I'll do my best to answer that one in just a little bit. In the miracle of the day, there's an alleged apparition of Mary on May 2nd, 1987 in Sevilla in Spain. I'll tell you about that in just a little bit. Let's take a look at the miracle news. We do this every week where we talk about the miracles happening all around the world and those things that relate to miracles. And I always post on my Facebook page different articles related to miracles that I come across during the week. And I always talk about the one that gets the most views on the show. And so this is an interesting one. It's about the Shroud of Turin. Of course, you all know the Shroud of Turin as the purported burial cloth of Christ. And for me itself, this has been something that's very interesting to me over the years. I believe it's the actual burial cloth of Christ. There are people who have different opinions, of course, but it seems to me that all the data and all the research seems to point in that direction. And I remember very specifically in 1988 when they were doing that carbon testing and around the world at the University of Arizona and at several other universities around the world. And I remember I was a 7th or 8th grader at the time, and I remember my religion teacher, he would always come in all the time with all these updates related to the shroud, all the media items that would come out that would relate what the testing was looking like. Was it really the authentic burial cloth of Christ? And of course, in 1988, we got that final testing that came back with some very disappointing results, which said that the shroud was dated to the 1200s. And as a result of that dating, they came out and said it was a medieval forgery. Well, that burst the bubble of my my religion teacher at the time, and all the kids as well. We were all pretty disappointed about that. But there have been different other studies that have been done since 1988, different sorts of testing in different locations on the shroud that are rendering different results. And so I'm always interested to hear the latest and greatest. And the Pope has not authorized new testing on the shroud, and the Pope is the one who owns that relic, so he'd be the one to initiate that again. But I think the Church felt kind of stung from the last time, those disappointing results. So we'll see if Pope Leo or the next Pope does it. But this is interesting, all the studies that come out. And so there was a very recent study where there was detected traces of plant and food DNA on the Shroud of Turin. And of course, this is the linen cloth long venerated by some as the burial cloth of Jesus, as I was saying. And researchers analyzing microscopic particles embedded in the fabric reported just recently genetic material linked to a wide variety of plants, including common food crops such as wheat, carrots, and peanuts, and other findings published in this BioRxiv. I guess that would come out to be BioR14 in Roman numerals, has drawn attention for adding another layer to the centuries-old debate over the origins of this relic. And the scientists involved in this study, they emphasized that the DNA was recovered from dust and fibers accumulated on the cloth rather than from visible residues. And the diversity of plant material suggests that the shroud has come into contact with numerous environments and substances over its time, and some identified species originate from regions far beyond the Middle East, reflecting the cloth having taken a very complex history of travel and handling and transport and public display over the years. And so the experts caution that the findings do not provide evidence about this being authentic or the age of it, and some of the plants, including crops native to the Americas, only became widespread in Europe after the 15th century. And so this seems to point to contamination of some sort. Researchers noted that DNA analysis alone cannot establish when or where the cloth was produced, and it limits the study's ability to resolve all these long-standing questions. And so the Shroud of Turin remains contested, of course, and this latest study does not it's not been peer-reviewed or is only considered preliminary, I suppose. So we'll see if anything comes of this. But this is just a news item related to the Shroud of Turin. They're finding more and more interesting information as related to that shroud. Let's take a look at Catholic Pub Trivia. We do this every week where we look at the trivia questions, or trivia. And last week we asked the question, who was the first canonized saint? And I think this is an easy one. A lot of people wrote in with this correct answer. The first canonized American saint is Elizabeth Ann Seton. She was born in New York in 1774. She was the first person born in the United States to be canonized by the Church, and she founded the Sisters of Charity and established the first free Catholic school system in America. And she was canonized in 1975 by Pope Paul VI. And I think it's kind of interesting to point out this element is that Elizabeth Ann Seton is the first American-born saint, but earlier saints like the North American martyrs, they lived or died in what is now the United States, but they weren't born here. But Catherine of Siena is that answer to that trivia question. And for this week's question, which pope did Catherine of Siena famously persuade through a series of letters and personal diplomacy to return the papacy from Avignon to Rome in the year 1377? And we'll be talking about St. Catherine today with author Joan Watson. So the question is about St. Catherine of Siena. Again, which pope did Catherine of Siena famously persuade through a series of letters and personal diplomacy to return the papacy to Avignon, from Avignon to Rome in the year 1377? If you think you know that answer and want to win the prize, the image of the faces of Mary, send me an email to questions@miraclehunter.com, and answers and winners will be posted on the show page on miraclehunter.com. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about Venerable Sister Theresia, a Carmelite sister of the Divine Heart of Jesus. Stay with us for that.
Now, back to the Miracle Hunter on EWTN. Here's Michael O'Neill.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. We always like talking about saints on this show, and future saints at that, and especially people who have lived in the United States. I think that's extra interesting for our listeners to know that holy people have walked amongst us here in the United States. And just this past week, we had the big news coming out that there are some new people on the path to sainthood when Pope Leo authorizes decrees coming out of Rome in conjunction with the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints. He lists all the new blesseds and venerables and saints. And one of these is Venerable Sister Theresia of the Most Holy Trinity. And she's from the Carmelite Sisters of the Divine Heart of Jesus. And that was big news here. She lived here in the United States for some time. And we're excited today to be joined by some Carmelite Sisters of the Divine Heart of Jesus, Sister Mary Michael and Sister Mariana Joy, to tell us all about this future saint. Welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, it's great to have you both on the line. And I think that for a lot of Americans, this was somebody who they did not know about. And we're seeing some of the articles coming out on Catholic news sources, and we're learning more about Sister Theresia. But I thought the best way to find out about who she truly is to talk to you, some of her Carmelite Sisters of the Divine Heart of Jesus. And we'll start with you, Sister Mary Michael. Tell us a little bit, if you were to paint the picture of this, of the brief and amazing life of Sister Theresia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, Michael. So Sister Theresia was born in the Netherlands on November 13th in 1897. And she was just a really, definitely a pious young girl, just very joyful. And in her biography, it's remarked that just her classmates loved her, her teachers loved her, her parents definitely loved her. And I think something that speaks of that very beautifully is, so her father died when she was 9 years old, and her mother ended up remarrying. And it was actually her stepfather, once she became of age, that was the obstacle, so to speak, to her entering the convent. And that was because he loved her so much. He doted over her, and just, she was the oldest of all the children. And he was so fond of her, he didn't want to let her go. So I just think that speaks so tenderly to, she must have had a very attractive personality, and very warm and very fun to be around. And yet also this striking devotion to the Lord, a very great love for the Eucharist. So as she was older and had a job and things, and even in school, she would go make visits to the Blessed Sacrament. And then once she did have her job and things, just had this great, interiority, which I think is such, she was already Carmelite in the making, but just was very aware of just wanting to be with the Lord and remain with him. And, that practice of recollection that we speak of in the Catholic tradition, and just, know that we're in the Lord's presence at every moment. Even in the midst of the world and in the midst of her work in a factory. So that's really beautiful. And then, so eventually her stepfather was talking to a friend, and he's relaying how his stepdaughter wants to enter the convent and how terrible that is and how he'll never let her go as long as he's alive. And the friend says, well, you shouldn't act like that. You should totally let her go. So it really changed his heart. Grace worked in that split second. And so he came home and he gave permission to her, and they both cried, and it was very dramatic. It sounds like in her biography, it's so beautiful. And so she ended up entering our Carmel of the Divine Heart of Jesus in Tilburg in Holland, is Tilburg in Germany or Holland? I forget. I just know the name all the time. In Holland, I believe, in 1917. So did her religious formation there, was so overjoyed to be in the convent. I'm going to pause there and reference. So even as a young child, she had a lot of illnesses, and had different sores that were on her body and different aches and pains, and bore that really gracefully. She got kind of a clean bill of health just around the time that she wanted to enter the convent. And so, the doctor wrote off, and the sisters accepted her. And then it wasn't long after she entered that her health got poor again. But then again, right before her first profession, she kind of recovered again. So she was allowed to make her first profession, and right after that, she was sent to the United States to be a missionary here. So
let's talk a little bit about that. Her missionary zeal, her desire to come to the New World, to the United States. What was that like? What was that decisionary process for her deciding to come here?
Yeah, our congregation as a whole, our charism, has a very strong missionary aspect to it. Our foundress our whole purpose was to save souls for the heart of Jesus and to bring souls to him. And she also, our foundress, Blessed Maria Theresia of St. Joseph, really wanted to draw especially fallen away Catholics back to the faith. So the new evangelization, she was already at it back in the 1920s and even earlier than that. And so Sister Theresia, when she entered, she would have known this community has a missionary spirit while still maintaining a Carmelite kind of contemplative way of life. So it's a beautiful balance of both. And she writes that's recorded in the biography and in some of her letters to her family and such, that she was so eager to just send herself and come to the New World and start doing visits to homes, people in their homes that, maybe weren't practicing the sacraments or weren't going to Mass, and wanted to just grow in a relationship with them and draw them back to the faith. So unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, that desire of hers never quite came to fruition as her illness got worse. And
from what I understand, pretty much right when she came to the United States, her illness returned or got worse. Talk a little bit about, upon being here in the United States, what her life was like.
Yeah, well, she ended up being in East Chicago, stationed there, and also in our convent in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Both of those places had references that she was doing kind of just menial convent house home work, She was in the kitchen, and apparently she had a natural aversion to cooking. But she overcame that and really just wanted to serve the sisters and was happy to do that. And so, just easy, simple, normal, mundane things like dusting. And she couldn't do much. So with that poor health, it was just trying to live the life of the sisters, but, just a rhythm of prayer and community life coming together for meals and recreation and prayer. But I get the impression that she couldn't really do a lot more than that. So.
And talk a little bit about the heroic virtues. I know when Rome recognizes someone as venerable, they're not looking at miracles or anything like this at this point. They're looking at the life of heroic virtue and how that person lived those virtues in a very special way. Talk a little bit about Sister Theresia and how, in her state, with her sickness and her short life, how she was able to demonstrate those virtues. What was Rome looking at when they sort of validated this positio?
Mm-hmm. I never did actually see the positio, so I don't know all that was contained or is contained there. But I'm sure, one of the things that stands out from her biography is really the patience and the outward gaze that she had, even in the midst of her intense suffering. Having a kidney disease, which was diagnosed as tuberculosis in her kidneys. On her death certificate, it reads that, but actually they say it was probably more likely that it was lupus. And just apparently that's terrible, terrible pains. And she had stiffness in her hands and her arms and her back and things, and didn't have any kind of painkiller of any sort. But whether it was the sisters in the convent or the doctors and nurses that were taking care of her, and really all her life, no one ever heard her complain or become frustrated with them or impatient with them. Or at least if she did, she humbly acknowledged and begged their forgiveness. There was such a notable and remarkable just attentiveness to the other and not thinking of herself and just trying to offer those pains to the Lord. That's one aspect.
Yeah, I think another thing that's significant is just it said that she had very much childlike obedience And that started at home from being a very young girl, but most especially in the convent. And yeah, obedience, it's one of the vows that we profess is religious, but I think it's just striking how much humility just shown forth from her, specifically in the convent. It says that she just kept the rule and constitutions so beautifully. And that is a gift that we know that the church gives to us. And if we follow those and are faithful, that is our path to the perfection of charity. So I think she lived that beautifully as well.
Wonderful. We've been talking today with two Carmelite sisters of the Divine Heart of Jesus, Sister Mary Michael and Sister Mariana Joy, about Venerable Sister Theresia of the Most Holy Trinity. And she is the most recent, just as of last week, Venerable in our Catholic Church. And so there's a lot of excitement for her and for her connection to the United States. I think Americans are especially interested to have somebody who walked amongst us being recognized by Rome in this way. And coming up next will be the path to beatification, in which a miracle will need to be established or identified and submitted to Rome in another Positio academic position paper. Talk a little bit about that process of finding a miracle, and have there been any cases of miracles already sort of being considered for her cause?
Yeah, so I know her biography records, even at the time, right after she passed away, there were various people writing in that miracles had happened and many favors attributed to her intercession. Some of those are recorded in the biography. I need to go reread those, so I don't remember or recall many of them or most of them. But I did just recently, or was reminded that apparently right after she passed, I understand this is in one of our convents, that we had a little Mexican boy, and he had some kind of a skin disease, and so he was in bed and couldn't get out of bed. And our sisters left the apostolate, or the place where the children were to go to prayers. And then shortly later, the little boy, just after she died, this little Mexican boy walked into the chapel fully dressed and fully healed. And the sisters said, what happened? And he was like, a sister came and helped me get dressed. And so they ended up showing him a picture of her. And he said, that was the sister, but she was much more beautiful than that. So, yeah, I don't know that that's, a documented miracle. I highly doubt it. But it is, an oral tradition story that has been passed down to us, which is really
Well, it sounds
beautiful.
like there's a number of cases that could possibly be considered from that time of her death or up until the present day. So that will be the next step in looking to move her towards beatification, is finding a miracle that medical doctors find to be without natural explanation through the intercession of Sister Theresia of the Most Holy Trinity. We've been talking today with two Carmelite sisters of the Divine Heart of Jesus about the newest venerable in our Catholic Church, Sister Theresia, and her incredible life of suffering and joy amidst all that suffering. And we've been talking with Sister Mary Michael and Sister Mariana Joy about her. And as we wrap up the interview today, what is your message, or what is the message of Sister Theresia that you would hope that people who are just getting to know her through these articles online and the interest that is generated about her life in this new declaration of Venerable, what is your hope that people learn about her and can kind of seek her intercession, of course, but what can they do to model their own lives over the way that she handled her suffering?
Maybe we could have two different thoughts for you. I think what comes to my mind is when I really read her biography, from a distance without paying much attention, one might think, oh, if you're just a lay person in the world, she was a Carmelite nun. I'm not a sister. Carmelite sister. I'm not a sister. Maybe she was really holy. I'm not really holy, and maybe she could seem unrelatable, but I just love reading closely and recognizing she didn't just have physical sufferings, but she was a person just like anyone else that had many devastating and painful experiences in her life, whether that was leaving the people that she loved in the country she loved to go elsewhere and follow the Lord, or the death of her father, to experience that kind of pain and then have to, merge herself into a new family and just the pains and trials that go along with that. She worked with alcoholics when she was, an older teenager or young adult. She knew the sufferings that all of us go through very intimately. So I think in the midst of that knowledge of human suffering, she again had this deep communion with the Lord. And I think she just gives all of us a testimony that, that's what the Lord is calling each one of us to. And no one is disqualified for any reason from this call to holiness and this call to know the Lord deeply and to follow him unreservedly.
Yeah, I think it's just striking that she so suffered with just joyful trust and surrender to the Lord. Her life was not long in any way. She had a pretty short life, actually, but the amount that she suffered and suffered with grace and suffered with joy, and that she just totally surrendered her whole life, her whole heart, her body and soul into the hands of the Father. And that started from a young girl. So I think, just suffering joyfully. Our founders called her the passion flower. And it's beautiful. Carmel means garden. And so, she's this beautiful intercessor for us. Giving everything for the Lord it's worth everything. And she lived and she died for him. And so, I think it's beautiful for us to call upon her, especially in the United States. It's beautiful. We've known about her here in St. Louis. She died in St. Louis, but now Pope Leo has proclaimed, no, she is for the whole church and the whole world. But how beautiful that she's for us in the United States too. I think it's a great gift.
Those are two beautiful reflections about Venerable Sister Theresia of the Most Holy Trinity. And we're so grateful to you for both joining us on today's show. And I'm sure that people out there who are listening will want to learn more about her life, her short life. And what is the best website or other place where people could go to read more or to find an intercessory prayer for people seeking her intercession?
Yeah, there is definitely a little more information on her at our website, carmelitedcj.org. Under our founders, the roots of our congregation and our founders, that tab. There's a little more information and information about ordering her biography and a prayer to her. And I'm sure in the coming days, as soon as possible, we'll get a little more up there as well and make that even more easy to find. But for now. Yeah.
Wonderful. I encourage people to check that out and to seek Sister Theresia as an intercessor, especially in our own times of suffering. She seems like a great intercessor for that. So we're so grateful to you, the two Carmelite sisters of the Divine Heart of Jesus, Sister Mary Michael and Sister Mariana Joy, for joining us on today's program.
Thank you,
Thanks
Michael.
for having us.
God bless. That was Sister Mary Michael and Sister Mariana Joy of the Carmelite Sisters of the Divine Heart of Jesus, talking to us about the newest Venerable in our Catholic Church, Sister Theresia of the Most Holy Trinity. People can learn more if they go to the website carmelitedcj.org to find out more about her biography and seek her intercession for miracles so she can move on to that next stage of blessed. We need to take a short break. But when we come back, we're going to be looking at the question of the week. Stay with us for that.
Now, back to the Miracle Hunter on EWTN. Here's Michael O'Neill.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill on the Miracle Hunter. I love getting your questions. People write in from around the world with questions about miracles happening in today's world and those that have happened centuries ago. And I really enjoy the questions in the email inbox. It makes my email inbox pretty strange, I must admit, some of the strange things that people ask about, but I don't mind. It's pretty interesting. And I also like giving answers to questions in person, not just over behind the wall of an email, but I travel around the country 10 or 20 times a year to different Catholic parishes or conferences or other events where, of course, I speak about miracles of all things. And I'm always talking about Eucharistic miracles or Marian apparitions or how saints are made or how the Catholic Church investigates the supernatural. But people can contact me. They click on the Contact tab on miraclehunter.com, and you send me a message that way. Or you email me at questions@miraclehunter.com, and I will get back to you. But maybe I'll be speaking at a parish or a conference or near you at a shrine sometime soon. And so I got a softball question for this week, for the question of the week, and it's a pretty good one. It's a fun one to try to answer. Dear Miracle Hunter, which has been your favorite country to visit while filming for the Explore series? Jenny. Well, thanks, Jenny, for your question, and it's a good one. I've done my fair share of travel around the world for EWTN, filming these various episodes which air on Saturdays on EWTN at 5:30 p.m. Central Time. And the show is Explore with the Miracle Hunter, which is my show where I go to a famous place of miracles, and I always dig into it, and I do an investigation and sort of relay what I learn. And it's a half-hour show with everything that my brain has figured out about that miracle. So it's always a fun program to do, and I've got a very talented film crew and a series of editors who work with me. If you have to ask me what's my favorite country that I've ever visited, it's hard for me to get around Italy. Italy seems like such a boring answer. I know there's more exotic locations that I've been to, but when you factor in sort of the history and the food and the wine and the culture and everything about it, Italy stands alone as my favorite place to visit. And I've been there any number of times, and we filmed there any number of times. It's truly a remarkable place, and I encourage anybody who's looking for a place to go on a pilgrimage, make sure that Rome is near the top of your list because of our great faith tradition there and all the great experiences that you're bound to have in Italy. So thanks, Jenny, for your fun question. And Italy is my winner in my list of favorite countries that I've visited, but there's more countries to visit, so maybe that list will get updated sometime soon. And thank you for your question. If you have a question for the Miracle Hunter, you can send me an email to questions@miraclehunter.com, and maybe I'll be reading your question on the air next week. Let's take a look at the 365 Days with Mary project. For today's date, we've got Our Lady of Atocha. And, we talk about Fatima on May 13th, or Lourdes on February 11th, or Guadalupe December 12th. But believe it or not, there's a different other Marian devotion that lines up exactly to each day of the calendar year from somewhere in the world. And so Our Lady of Atocha, Nuestra Señora de Atocha, is venerated specifically in Madrid, and May 2nd is associated with her in connection with the historic Dos de Mayo uprising. And according to tradition, the people of Madrid entrusted themselves to Our Lady of Atocha during the 1808 uprising against French occupation. And after the event, devotion to her deepened, and she came to be regarded as the protectress of the city. And the title itself dates back much earlier to medieval Spain, when a shrine to Mary in the Atocha district became an important pilgrimage site. And that is Our Lady of Atocha from 1808 in Madrid in Spain. And she's the subject of today's 365 Days with Mary. Now, we always try to look at the miracle of the day, some miraculous event that lines up exactly to the day's date. So for today, May 2nd, we've got reports of an alleged Marian apparition on May 2nd in 1987 in Sevilla, which arose from a prayer gathering attended by a sizable group of lay faithful. And according to later testimonies that circulated in devotional circles, the event reportedly took place from an outdoor rosary, reflecting a surge in Marian interest in Spain in the 1980s. And witnesses described that at some point during the gathering, several individuals claimed to see unusual luminous phenomena, bright lights or some changes in the sky, while a smaller number reported seeing an actual figure that they identified as the Virgin Mary. And other people there didn't see anything at all, but they felt a strong sense of silence and peace at that location. So that's today's alleged Marian apparition of the day on May 7th, 1987 in Sevilla in Spain. And each week we report on some miraculous occurrence that happened on the day's date at some year in Christian history. And if we look at sainthood news, Pope Leo just came out this past week with new decrees. He promulgated new decrees on Monday, April 27th. The Holy Father received an audience His Eminence Cardinal Marcelo Semeraro, the prefect for the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints. And during this audience, the Pope authorized this dicastery to promulgate a decree regarding the martyrdom of the servants of God, Stanislao Ortega Garcia, born Lorenzo, and his 48 companions, professed religious of the Institute of the Brothers of Christian Instruction of St. Gabriel, as well as Emmanuel Berenguer Clucella, a diocesan priest killed between July and November 1936 out of hatred of the faith Odium Fidei in various places in Catalonia, in Spain, in the context of this same persecution. And Lorenzo Ortega Garcia, he was known as Stanislaus, and he was a member of the Brothers of Christ Instruction of St. Gabriel, which was a teaching institute, and he was killed in 1936 in Catalonia during anti-religious violence. And this is the sainthood news for this week, with one miracle. Blessed Stanislaus and his companions would move on to be named saints, but for now they are blesseds. Let's take a look at the Might Be Saint of the Day. We do this every week where we talk about someone on the path to sainthood. And for today, Blessed Alessandra Sabatini, living from 1961 to 1984, is our Might Be Saint of the Day. And she was born on August 19, 1961, in Riccione, in Italy. And she was a lifelong laywoman in the Diocese of Rimini, in Italy, when she was the daughter of Giuseppe and Agnese Bonin Sabatini, and had one brother. And she was known to be a pious girl, and Alessandra made her first communion in 1970, confirmed in 72, and joined the association, the community of John the 23rd at the age of 12. And she studied medicine with a plan to work with missionaries in Africa, and was engaged to a man named Guido. Alessandra spent her free time working with the poor, being consumed by the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the poor, the kingdom of God is theirs," volunteering in drug rehabilitation centers, living poorer than the people she helped, and she died from being struck by a motor vehicle and spending 3 days in a coma. And her cause for canonization presents her as a model for living heroic Christian virtues in a normal working life. And she died in 1984 with those head injuries sustained when she was hit by a car on April 29, 1984. And she was beatified by Pope Francis, or declared venerable by Pope Francis, and then he declared her blessed, and he recognized her in a special ceremony decree in that point. So that was October 24, 2021, Pope Francis declaring her blessed. And she is the Might Be Saint of the Day, Blessed Alessandra Sabatini, who, with one more miracle, will be known as Saint Alessandra. And for people who want to check out my book, you can check out They Might Be Saints, available at EWTN RC, or you can watch the show. Go to theymightbesaints.com, or tune in on May 10th on Sunday at 1:30 p.m. They Might Be Saints Father Nelson Baker. I examined the canonization cause for Father Nelson Baker. He was a former business owner, built a world-class city of charity with an orphanage and a home for troubled youth, and a hospital and a basilica. That is, They Might Be Saints Father Nelson Baker on Sunday, May 10th at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking with Joan Watson, author of Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity. Stay with us for that.
Now, back to the Miracle Hunter on EWTN. Here's Michael O'Neill.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Miracle Hunter radio show on EWTN Radio. This is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. We talk about mystics a lot on this show, and one of the most famous mystics in history, if you were to ask any historian or theologian, they'd point to St. Catherine of Siena. And perhaps it's these various things like her invisible stigmata or her mystical marriage to Christ or living on the Eucharist alone and or her visions and ecstasies and healings and exorcisms. There are all sorts of various things that are related to her. And anybody who's been to her tomb or her church in Siena has seen her famous incorrupt head and the relics there. So truly a saint associated with miracles. Well, we're so excited today to be joined by Joan Watson, who's the author of a brand new book called Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity. It's out from Scepter Books, and it's a good one. And we're so excited to talk with Joan on today's program about the great saint. Thank you so much, Joan, for joining us on today's program.
Thank you, Michael. It's a joy to be here with you.
Well, it's a great thing that you wrote this book, and I think that St. Catherine of Siena is one of the great saints in the history of our church, miracle worker or otherwise. I think you picked a great saint to focus on. And when we do talk about miracles, for example, what are some of the things that St. Catherine of Siena was known for, even to this day?
Yeah, so you named some of the most famous. It's kind of funny when you think of Catherine, she's done it all. It seems like everything has happened to her. So stigmata, check the box. Her stigmata was invisible. She asked the Lord, she received it in Pisa, and she asked the Lord that it be invisible to everyone, but she suffered greatly from it. Her mystical marriage, there are two real ones I think that really impact her theology and her approach to the world, and that would be her mystical marriage with Christ, where when she was living, before she had kind of her active period of her life, she was living basically as a hermit in her own home, in her mother's home, and she was praying and living and doing great penance, and Christ appeared to her and wed himself to her in a mystical marriage. She could only see the ring. No one could see the ring he gave her, but beautiful wedding ceremony with Our Lady and St. Paul and St. John the Evangelist, and King David played the harp, which for some reason delights me to think that the Lord even arranged music for this wedding ceremony. And they had this mystical marriage. And so she was wedded to Christ in a way. Of course, every religious, my sisters are religious. She's a Dominican sister, and Christ is her bride. But for Catherine, it was in this deeper sense, in a way. The other mystical experience, I think that's one of my favorites, is that Christ actually removed her heart from her chest, and she spoke to her spiritual director, Raymond, and said, I have no heart, that Christ took my heart. And Raymond was like, okay, that's, a nice turn of phrase, Christ takes your heart, But then a few days later, she was praying in the Church of St. Dominic in Siena, where you mentioned her head is, and there's still a spot that it's marked where this took place. Christ gave his heart to her. And so there was this mystical exchange of hearts that I think really impacts Catherine's theology, because she was able to love as Christ loved, and she was able to see the church, the body of Christ, as her own, in a sense, because she had Christ's heart to love it with, and she really saw the bride as her own because she had wed herself to Christ, or he had wed himself to her. So I think those mystical experiences really impact her entire life. But you mentioned, subsisting only on the Eucharist, her intense fasts. She barely slept at night. Sometimes she would go days without sleeping because of her prayer, her ecstasies. She had incredible ecstatic prayer, visions of the devil. The devil would torment her. So just pretty much everything, when you think of mystical experiences, Catherine experienced it.
Wonderful. She's an amazing saint, and we're so grateful that you've put together this book that draws people to look at her in a way that it's beyond some of these mystical experiences that she's known for, and it really draws you closer. We're talking today with Joan Watson, author of this brand new book, Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity. And so what first drew you to Catherine of Siena with this idea of a spiritual coach? And how did that idea shape how you laid the book out?
Yeah, so it's part of a series from Scepter, the Coached By series. And so they have several in this series where we see really the saints as our spiritual director. So there were kind of two elements. Number one, when I looked at her, there's a lot of primary resource from Catherine. She wrote over 400 letters, which is what I based the book on. And so just on a practical level, I definitely did not feel competent to try to guess what Catherine would tell us as as our spiritual director. And so it was natural to look for a saint who did act as spiritual director for so many, and we have access to so much of her writings. So on a practical level, I wanted to just delve into her letters. Some of the letters that are most well known by Catherine are the ones written to bishops and popes. But I knew that she had written to lay people, and she had written to married women, and she had written to married men. And I wanted to bring that advice and those letters to us in the pew, because I knew she had something to say to us that sometimes gets lost when we do focus on Catherine, the miracle worker, and the mystic. So I wanted to bring this very practical, down-to-earth advice from this great saint to the person in the pew. And that kind of connected. The second reason I was drawn to her was I was intimidated by her. I think she can feel so far removed from us, because I certainly don't subsist on the Eucharist. I certainly do not have ecstatic prayer. And so I wanted to get to know her as a sister. I wanted to get to know her as a friend. And I wanted to allow her words to really shape my life. I always tell people all the books I write are usually for me. They're the books I need in my life. They're the virtues I need to work on. And as I read her writings, I realized she had something to say to us very profoundly about charity. And I think we live in a world that really struggles with charity towards our neighbor, charity towards the church, even charity towards ourselves. And so I was really drawn to that theme as I read her writings.
Beautiful. And speaking of charity, your book frames charity as something that can be trained. How do you think Catherine understands charity, and how is that different from sort of a more modern sense?
Yeah. So, there's obviously the theological virtue of charity, which we receive, that's infused, we receive through the sacraments, we receive from grace. But it is also something I think we need to practice. It's a human virtue also, right? It's both and, faith, hope, and charity. And so we need to practice it. And she's very sensible when she comes to especially practicing the virtues, learning the virtues. And one thing that really struck me with Catherine, so the way the book is laid out is lessons in love of God. So how can I love God more? Lessons of love of my neighbor, and then love of the church, because she did live at such a difficult time in the church, but loved the church so deeply. But one thing that really struck me was when she talks about loving our neighbor, she understands and she receives from the Father in mystical lessons, which she wrote down in what's called the dialogue, which she called her book. She receives from conversations with God the Father that really the only way we can know that we love God is how we love our neighbor. And that's scriptural, of course. Jesus tells us that. But, whenever we love God, it's always in return of his love, right? He's always going to be the one that loved us first. And he always deserves our love. And so I can love God with all my heart, but it's always in response to him loving me first. And he always deserves it. And so he tells Catherine, the way you really love the way I love is that you love your neighbor. You love your neighbor who doesn't love you. You love your neighbor who doesn't love you in return. You love your neighbor who doesn't deserve you. And when you love your neighbor in that way, you can love the way I love. And that was so profound and really struck me. Even just the other day, I was praying to love God more. And I was asking God, increase in my heart and soul a greater love for you. And it just, I'm not going to say I heard the voice of God, but I was just reminded, okay, that means I have to love my neighbor. That's how we love God, is through love of neighbor. And when I fail to love my neighbor, I'm really failing to love God. And that's, straight out of Matthew 25. But Catherine really saw this in a beautifully profound way.
Very well put. We're talking today with Joan Watson, the author of Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity. It's newly out from Scepter Books. And when we look at the life of Catherine and see all her experiences, how do you sort of translate those intense mystical experiences, the visions, the ascetic practices, into practical guidance for the everyday reader of today?
Yeah. So one thing that really struck me was that love for the Eucharist and that intense desire for the Eucharist that she had. She received permission to receive the Eucharist daily, which was unusual at the time, to receive it frequently. She had this intense desire and love for the Eucharist. And there's these beautiful stories of how at one point the priest thought he lost part of the host, and he was frantic because he thought part of the host had dropped. He found out later that it had actually leapt off the altar to go so that Catherine could receive communion. She has, beautiful stories connected with this desire for the Eucharist. And I think, the Eucharist is probably never going to leap off the altar to come to me, but how can I increase a desire to receive the Eucharist? How often do I take for granted the gift of the Eucharist, the gift to receive him often? How often do I receive him without really thinking about it, going through the motions? And so we have to look at the elements of Catherine's life that's sometimes fantastic and think, how does this teach me something? She had a vision, for example, of her father was going to spend many years in purgatory after he died. And she begged to our Lord that her father avoid the pains of purgatory. And God gave her a pain in her side that she suffered from for the rest of her life so that she would suffer rather than her father. Now, we're not going to have this mystical experience with God, right? That's probably not going to happen to us. But how can I offer up the sufferings in my life for the souls in purgatory, for those I love? And do I even think about the fact that I should be offering these pains and struggles so that my loved ones don't have to endure purgatory? I think so often we think, oh, good, they made it to purgatory. But she didn't even want her father to endure that suffering. So we have to look at what she endured and figure out what does that say to me, and how can I cultivate a greater love or a greater penance in my own life, even if I'm not called to the extremes of Catherine.
Wonderful. And as we wrap up the interview today, I always like to ask, for those people who end up picking up this book, this Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity, what is your great hope that, for one thing, that somebody will take away from this book, a lesson they'll learn?
Yeah, I think hopefully that we don't have to actually be great mystics to be great saints. And Catherine is very adamant in her writings that we aren't called to be her. We're not called to be Catherine of Siena. We're called to be, St. Michael and St. Joan. We're called to be the saints where God put us. And so she gives us this practical knowledge, wisdom. She gives us this practical understanding of holiness so that we can be saints with the people that God puts in our lives. And so, yes, you might not have the mystical experiences of Catherine, but you have plenty of other opportunities to bring you closer to Christ, and don't waste those today.
Wonderful. Well, we're so grateful to you, Joan Watson, for talking to us about St. Catherine of Siena and your brand new book, Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity, out from Scepter Books. Thank you so much for joining us on today's program.
Thanks so much, Michael. God bless.
God bless. That was Joan Watson, who wrote Coached by Catherine of Siena, Lessons in Charity. Check that one out from Scepter Books. It's a new one, and she's a great saint to get to know, St. Catherine of Siena. And that's all the time we have for today's show. If you missed any of this episode or want to catch up on past episodes, you can go to EWTN.com/radio, check out the audio archives, or download the free EWTN app. Check out my series, Explore with the Miracle Hunter, Tre Fontane. I investigate a miraculous encounter at the site where St. Paul was martyred, the Virgin of Revelation's appearance to Bruno Carnacchiola, a rabid anti-Catholic, changed both the man and the church itself. I'd like to thank our guest today, Joan Watson, author of Coached by Catherine of Siena, and also Sister Mary Michael. We talked today about the Carmelite sister of the Divine Heart of Jesus, Venerable Sister Theresia, now moving along the path to sainthood. I'd like to thank you for joining me today on Miracle Hunter, where from claims of healings and visions to the world's most inexplicable events, whether you're a believer or a skeptic, the truth is always worth the hunt. Talk to you next week.